In Texas, families are gradually confirming the deaths of loved ones killed by last week's flooding, including children from a girls' summer camp in Kirk County. The camp largely sits in a flood-prone area and lost at least 27 campers and counselors. CNN's Bill Weir explains how the camp tragedy highlights the impacts of climate change.
Victor, as you drive the highway that winds along the Guadalupe River, you see miles and miles of destruction like this, stacked up against surviving trees on the riverbank, homes, cars, timber, and of course this is where a lot of those dog teams are searching for those missing here. There is such raw heartbreak now, over a week since the flash floods. The president, the FEMA director coming here today amid their promises to end FEMA as America knows it today. There has been mixed reviews for the response here, which is always the case. But what people should really understand is FEMA is more than just sort of meals and cots after a disaster. FEMA is responsible for alerting Americans to the threat of flash floods wherever they live. But FEMA maps are horribly outdated. For example, Camp Mystic, where those girls were lost, 8 of the buildings, if you look at FEMA maps, were inside that 100-year floodplain, the most dangerous stretch. But if you use maps from places like First Street Foundation, nonprofits that take into account modern climate trends, that number jumps to 17 buildings. FEMA only thinks 13 million Americans live in flood zones. The number's probably closer to 60 million because the maps are so outdated. So if it's incumbent on states and locals, municipalities to fend for themselves as the climate warms up, does that mean places like Kirk County have to figure out the hydrology and the moving life or death line? These are massive questions at a time of real pain and heartbreak here, but there's also changes in mindset for families who send kids to camps along the Guadalupe here, and instead of maybe evacuation plans that call for kids to get on buses when a storm hits, there needs to be more of a tsunami mentality to go for high ground in order to save lives, because now there are new levels that longtime Hill Country residents never imagined they would hit on floodplains. Earth is changing. You can just Google flash flooding in the last month around the world, and you can see it everywhere, in every continent. But again, knowledge is power, Victor. And the more the federal government, in places like Texas, the state government, refuses to talk about climate change and tries to bury the science around it, it becomes more incumbent on local communities to look out for themselves and adapt with these changing forces that are just so violent and so unpredictable.
Bill Weir, thanks for that. You know what, let's dig into the climate change impact now with Monica Medina, who is the former Principal Deputy Administrator for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, known as NOAA. She worked under the Trump administration. Thank you for being with me. So NOAA has faced some funding cuts. The president's nominee to lead NOAA, Neil Jacobs, he faced Senate confirmation this week, supports the president's proposed 27% cut to NOAA's budget. Senator Markey said that a cut that's substantial without impacting weather readiness is hallucination. Do you agree with that a 27% impact, there's no way you can avoid preparedness with that cut?
Thank you so much, Victor, for having me on today. And I have to say, I'm a Biden administration appointee, and I served in the Obama administration at NOAA. And I agree 100% with Senator Markey. This is hallucination. Republican policy decisions are reckless and are leading to tragic and preventable deaths. Innocent lives were lost here. These people who were in harm's way during this storm were failed at various levels in the emergency management system. And I think we're going to find that. Without trying to lay blame on any one person, I think we know that our system isn't up to the task of climate change. And unfortunately, the president continues to call climate change a hoax, and members of his administration have downplayed or dismissed the notion that these storms are getting more and more deadly. And to hone in on the new NOAA administrator nominee, I think the challenge is that in the past, he served in NOAA during the Hurricane Dorian episode when the president drew on that hurricane map and tried to persuade people that the storm was going in a different direction than it actually was. And Neil Jacobs backed the president then, and I suspect I'm fairly certain he will back the president on cuts to NOAA and to FEMA. And this is just tragic. Our divisiveness in our country is leading to deaths. And it's clear that the people in Kerr County didn't want the disaster assistance that the Biden administration made available to them. And when they finally took it, they didn't use it to put important storm preparedness measures in place. And as a result, here we are looking for people who tragically died in a storm in which they could have been warned and they could have been out of harm's way.
My apologies for the administration misidentification. Let me get your reaction to something we're seeing from Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. She posted yesterday as there are questions about this storm. She posted, first they said we were crazy for saying that they're controlling the weather and spraying chemicals in our skies. Now they're admitting that they're controlling the weather and spraying chemicals in our skies, but that it's not causing any harm. Call me crazy, I don't care, but I'll go ahead and say it. Weather modification and geoengineering is deadly and dangerous. And so that's from the member of Congress. And then the EPA posted online, Americans have legitimate questions about contrails and geoengineering, and they deserve straight answers. What's your reaction to that? Legitimate questions about weather control and geoengineering.
There is nothing about this storm that was controlled by scientific experiments regarding geoengineering. The government is not controlling the weather. The people who are modifying the weather are all of us out there who continue to put polluting gases into our atmosphere that are causing our climate to heat up. And that's the real weather modification that's going on right now. And this kind of disinformation leads people to think that every part of the warning system can't be trusted at a moment when they have to move quickly and every minute matters. And that's the real tragedy here, that we have leaders in government, Republican leaders in government, who are undermining the very systems that have been put into place. And as a person who served in government, it's heartbreaking to me to think that people, my fellow Americans, would believe that I, in my role in the federal administration under a Democratic president, wouldn't have their best interest at heart. That's heartbreaking. And the weather forecasters out there in America and the FEMA first responders sure as heck aren't thinking about whether the person is a Republican or a Democrat, whether to get the storm forecast out in certain congressional districts or in certain states. The whole system is falling apart because Republicans are taking it apart and dismantling it and failing to fund it at the levels we need in order to meet the moment with climate change.
The president is kind of softening his language, the rhetoric on what's next for FEMA. At the beginning of the administration, he said FEMA's going away. Now he's complimenting them for doing great work. They say they're going to change what it is. I just asked the former acting secretary of DHS if he had any concerns about the FEMA administrator, acting FEMA administrator, being missing in action over the last week. We've not heard from him. We've not seen him. He wasn't on Air Force One with the president and members of Congress and the administration yesterday. And so do you have concerns that the head of FEMA is missing from this entire conversation and operation, seemingly?
I do have grave concerns about that, and I disagree with your previous guest. The prior FEMA administrators in Democratic and Republican administrations would have been on the ground, not because they're needed to make critical decisions, but because it's symbolically showing that the government is there to help. And they can make some of those higher level calls that need to be made at the local level. Right now, what we have is a FEMA and Homeland Security system that the Trump administration and Secretary Noem put into place that are requiring decisions to go all the way back to Washington, the kind of decisions that should be made in Texas or wherever that disaster strikes. And make no mistake, there will be more this summer. And it could happen anywhere in this country. No part of the country is immune from these kinds of climate weather shocks.
Yeah, and sources have told CNN that requirement to have decisions about $100,000 grants or expenditures go all the way up to the secretary caused delays in the really critical immediate hours around the start of the dangerous flooding. Monica Medina, I got to end it there, but I thank you for your time.